All right. Welcome back. Happy Monday. I'm
Mhm.
super excited. I have my friend Melissa with me today. We are going to talk about the gap in the gain, which, Melissa, we've done this a little bit before, right? I think originally you might have recommended this book to me.
I fell in love with this book last year. Listened to it on Audible and loved it. And I do think we talked about that. Yeah, yeah,
Do you remember how
it was
you
good.
found it?
I was trying to remember that today, and I can't remember if I think it was maybe a podcast. I had heard Dr. Hardy on a podcast, I believe.
Okay.
And yeah,
Yeah. And you went from there. Uh,
then
it's
yeah,
it's interesting when you say Dr. Hardy, he's young, right? We're not.
he,
I mean, maybe we sound young, but we're not.
we're not young. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, he is
I,
young. Yeah,
so he wrote this along with Dan Sullivan, who kind of I think really developed a lot of the concepts, right? And
right.
then he took it and just ran with it. So
He did.
um,
And on the Audible, after each chapter, they have those conversations with one another, and that's one of my favorite parts of the book. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really I actually bought the written version of it for this, but I listened to it on Audible
mhm.
again too, and I do think there's just so much more content listening to it that way. So it's kind of
Yes.
interesting. But
Yeah.
do you want to tell the good people what you do, who you are?
Sure. So I am a school psychologist and been working in public education for 25 years. That is what I do.
That is what you do. Melissa and I have known each other for probably 25 years or so. It's been a while.
Yes, I believe
Um,
so.
and
Yeah,
we've worked together in the past, and we
we
still get together and walk and do things like that and
yeah, talk about good books
talk
and
about good books.
hang out. Yeah, our husbands taught together and
Yeah,
kids grew up together. So,
right. So moving on to those new chapters a little bit. And I was
mhm.
thinking about that a little bit with this book. Again, like kind of going back to, I wonder what it would have been like if I would have been reading stuff like this when I was in my early 20s, you
Right.
know?
Yes. I know it is interesting because yeah, I wasn't at all. I don't
Right.
think. I certainly was studying psychology, right? So like
Right.
that part is there. But I did think a lot about that today. I was thinking about so much of psychology is
Mhm.
looking at pathology or people who are struggling and how to get them to the baseline, right?
Mhm.
And not as much focus has been on positive psychology, certainly much more in recent years. And my own personal reading, I think, has focused so much more on positive psychology and some of the kind of ideas that are in books like The Gap and the Gain. And I
Yeah.
just think they're powerful, powerful for everyone, not just getting from functioning to thriving, but for even if you're struggling, I think they have some really powerful ideas. So,
Right. And I mean, having worked in education for so long, both of us have been in education and especially in special education when you're often talking about the deficits. I think we both have
right.
really changed. I don't want to say change, but really focused more in the last few years of just like, let's talk about the good stuff and let's work from
Yeah,
there. Right. So,
right.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, how can we take the strengths and run with it? You
Yeah.
know, but,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So, the gap in the gain um, is a pretty short read, right? I
Hmm.
think it's about, I don't know, it might be 5 or 6 hours on Audible.
I think so. Not long.
Not long. And I think you could read it faster than that probably because there is that all of that extra discussion, right?
Right,
In the
right,
Audible part. But so just talking about let's just talk about kind of what the gap, what it means to be in the gap or the gain.
right.
Um, I did underline a few things, and it says your future growth and progress are based on in your understanding about the difference between the two ways which you can measure yourself against an ideal, which puts you in what Dan Sullivan calls the gap, and against your starting point, which puts you in the gain. So I just think, I don't know, right now, especially with social media, I feel like our whole world is designed to be this gap thinking, right? We are
Absolutely.
measuring ourselves against an ideal, which
Yep. And
which isn't
comparing, right? Like both of
right,
those two things that pull you in the gap. Like, yeah, always having those external reference points instead of our own personal.
right. And as an
Yeah.
occupational therapist, I mean, and somebody who's trained to write measurable goals, how do you compare yourself against something
Right.
that's not measurable, right? This idea
Mm-hmm.
is not, we make it up. Like
It
it's
we
made up.
we do. That's the thing. Most of the time, it's not even a real attainable thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just so much a part of our focus. I was thinking about this too in terms of like being when I was first diagnosed, right? And kind of looking at all of that, and in terms of um not trying to stay positive so much as just trying to get any sort of win. And I feel
Right.
like that is kind of the early start of, am I going to be in the gap or the gain with all of this, right?
Yes. No, I think that, I mean, now reflecting back and just seeing pieces of your journey, it seems like you were really, without even knowing it, intentionally trying to put yourself into the gain instead of the gap.
Yeah.
So,
So the gain comes from just looking at where we have come in
right,
whatever amount of time, right? On a regular
right.
basis. Do you think you're more of a gap person or a gain
Yeah, because we're
person?
all growing every day, right? I did notice, even though
Right.
I didn't have the book physically and I just did it on Audible, there were some PDFs and there's kind
Yeah.
of a nice visual even in there where,
Okay.
of course, we have our starting point and then things we've achieved and then that ideal. And whether you're in the gap and the gain, that's always going to be there because we always do
Right.
have ideals, right? But whether you stay in the gap or the gain is just all about the measurement, whether you're measuring up to the ideal or you're measuring down.
I think when we look at all of that, I there's a quote in there that he talks about like you can be in the gap, but I think the biggest part of that is recognizing it and not staying in it, right? So
Right.
it's really, it's okay to go, oh, this doesn't seem fair, or this isn't, I don't want this, or I didn't ask for this. But
Right.
you can't then, if you continue to build every decision based on that versus saying, okay, this is what it is. How can I make
How can I?
progress?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For
And I
me.
love that. I think he said something about like to say you're not going to go into the gap is again creating this ideal that's, we're humans, we're going to go in the gap.
Right.
So just recognize it. And that's another, I love that you're bringing this book to your community because I just think the more people we're surrounding ourselves with and using some of that same language, we can
Yeah.
support each other in that, right? So
Right.
maybe I'll complain about something going on and you can listen to that and then help me reframe it, you know, to be in the
Right. And
game.
and with the cancer stuff too, like we're not saying that you should just stay positive. Like that's the kind of stuff too that you oftentimes as a patient you get so much of that, you know. This whole idea of just staying positive like through everything is just ridiculous. And again, it just makes you feel like a failure as somebody with cancer. Like I can't just
Right.
stay positive, right? But I
No.
can look at how to move forward, or I can say, okay, I am
Hmm.
going to acknowledge that this is terrible, but then I got to
Hmm.
figure out how to move forward from that,
Exactly.
right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I had put a bunch of notes in here, and I just found that whole little diagram of what you were just talking about with moving
Hmm.
up and down from the visualization of that. um
Hmm.
and I here's another quote that I thought was interesting. It says, if you focus on what you lack, you lose what you have. If you focus on what you have, you gain what you lack.
Love that.
It's kind of, the title of that little part is called Get Off the Gap Treadmill. So I think
Yeah.
it's really easy for us to forget all of the things that we do have that are
Hmm.
going our way,
Yeah,
even in crisis, right? In this
absolutely.
really
You
traumatic.
can, yeah, you can reframe it and find something um, that's a win. right?
It is a way. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just think it's really powerful. Like when they talk about the gratitude, the research on gratitude is so amazing. Like
Amazing.
there, I don't know
Hmm.
of another treatment or intervention or that has the effect that being in a state of gratitude can do for you. And I just think those practices to stay in that mindset are so
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. And it is interesting, again, just kind of intuitively, when I was first diagnosed, I bought this little red notebook. I took it everywhere with me, but the inside part of it, I labeled it answered prayers and like literally just started like when
Mhm.
found my doctors, and that's all gratitude. Like, I don't know,
Mhm.
however you label it in that respect, but
Right.
it is looking for the things,
Mhm.
that are working and are helping. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was thinking about that when he specifically was talking about the education system, obviously, because we've been in that world so much
yeah,
and how sadly there it isn't designed to keep us in the gain. And in fact, it's sort of designed to keep us in the gap. But I thought, how powerful would that be if we could teach children at a young age
yeah,
how to do that, how
yeah,
to better um, determine their own references and
yeah,
measure their own growth.
yeah.
And obviously, we do that in little ways. And I think education has come a little ways on that path, but we could just do so much better.
Yeah,
So,
some of that, I mean, it's hard for me not to be a little cynical about that, but I think some of that has gone away because educators have not been given the respect that they deserve, that kids
mhm,
are growing. And so therefore we've implemented all of these things to
right.
further talk about what,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
kids are in the, or how they're in the gap versus the gains that they've made.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
So true.
it's,
So
yeah,
true.
that's a whole nother subject, right? I could
Right.
talk about for a long time, but
The things we could do.
yeah, yeah. I bookmarked another thing, and it says wanting is a capability. It says this transformation, moving from needing to wanting, is a capability. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Yes, it's a risk at first because your previous tendencies of justification are well developed and habitual. I thought that was interesting too. And I've been thinking a lot about, I know that what you think about is kind of what is at the, what you become or you are, kind of
Hmm.
all of your thoughts, right? And I
Right.
think some of the best examples of that is like I just got a different vehicle a couple months ago. When I first got it, all I could see was those vehicles. Like they were
Right.
everywhere, right? Because that's what you're thinking about. Right? But it's the same with everything else. And
Mhm.
when you're thinking like gap thoughts of what I need, all of these things versus
Mhm.
what have or what you have done, that's where your brain goes. And it's not growth. It's like the opposite of growth.
Yeah, it really is. It's so powerful. It's kind of crazy how powerful your mind is in that way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I listening to it this time, I don't know if I focused as much last time on that difference of wants and needs and the ways to practice, you know, that shift.
Yeah.
So,
I think one thing that's interesting and that I've noticed over the years is that it is one thing to think it, but it's another level to both write it down and also to
mhm.
speak it out loud. So
Yes.
to say it in conversation, to correct people when I don't want to say, well, maybe correct's not the best word, but to kind of
Hmm.
readjust a thought or say it
Yes.
differently, it's really can be powerful. And you know,
Hmm.
and it's time well spent. Yeah, I think so. One of the other things it was talking about the gap being based on unhealthy need or attachment to something outside
Hmm.
of yourself. And it's like we're just so programmed for that kind of thing, right?
We
But
are.
but I
And I think we're bombarded, right, with
yeah,
media and with just our whole world is really about constantly showing us having other people tell us what they think we
Yeah.
need, right? And
Right.
sell us something new and promote something else. So yeah,
Right.
so it's you. I think there just has to be something intentional that we're doing if we want to have it be different.
Right. And again, just saying that that ideal is not mine, right? Or that
Right,
I don't have to do it that way, right? So,
right,
um,
yeah.
yeah, I've been trying since we're still early on in the year here, but I've been like, okay, I'm not going to buy anything new clothing wise,
Hmm.
and I have been like, okay, well, I'm okay with Poshmark, so I have bought a few things, right?
Yes,
Again, just trying to curb that whole that like
right,
just because I want another color of a sweatshirt that I already have is like really,
right,
So again, just
right,
recognizing I do have, and I,
right,
you know, the other thing for me that's helpful is even tying that to my larger ideal of I'm trying to move to a life that is more about freedom and flexibility from a time standpoint. So, like, do
right,
I want to spend my money on something that
right,
ultimately is going to sit in my closet? You know,
right, exactly. And yeah, yeah,
and he
no,
talks about that too, kind of building that those ideals for yourself
right, right.
as you go through, right?
And yeah, having our own. I know. I thought it was powerful when I think it was a time when Ben and Dan were discussing, and Dan Sullivan hasn't watched TV for 30 years or something like that. Yeah, it was
I
crazy.
think it's
It was
yeah. It started out as like a challenge for 30 days, and it's
right.
continued to go on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So I thought, well, I don't think that's an ideal that I have quite for myself.
right,
However, I
right.
did think the amount of time that freed up for him and the things he could accomplish and do and enjoy
Yeah.
are that's incredible. So I thought, well, might want to create a reference point for myself, not no TV, but certainly maybe less TV, but just things like that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, and it's not just TV because, if you
Hmm.
get enjoyment from TV, and I definitely do,
Sure.
then that's great. And the ideal is to build this life that you really love, really, and
Hmm.
recognize it, right? Stay in the gain from that. But like,
Hmm.
but yeah, thinking about all of that. One of the other things he talks about towards the end is building that nighttime routine. Like,
Yes.
and I was like, okay, I do feel like I need to not give my best time
Right.
to just watching TV. Like
Right.
I
Right.
fine, turn it on, watch it but then turn it back off, get back on track in terms of thinking about what
Right.
is coming. So,
Yes. And I will say when I listened to the book last year, I did start writing down wins for the day and wins for tomorrow. And I loved that practice. And so listening to it again, I thought, why did I don't remember when I stopped and why I
yeah.
stopped, but I'm like back on that practice. And I just thought this is the kind of book that I want to listen to maybe once a year to remind
I
myself.
know it is just a good, and until
Hmm.
it does become something that is a habit. And we both have
Hmm.
talked quite a bit about like some sort of journaling practice and things like that. And I think we both have
Hmm.
come to it and left it and all those things a million
Right.
times. It's like, well, clearly I haven't figured out what actually
Right.
works for me yet,
Right.
right? But
Right.
but yeah, I think you're right. I actually did last night too, wrote wins. So,
Yeah.
you know, the other, yeah, I feel like with all of this, anything that you look and read about and things, it's like, how do you fit this into your life, because I'm not the most structured person, and I'm realizing that that's not the life that I'm really moving towards. I don't want to be more
Right.
structured, but I do want to be intentional about the time, that I
Yes.
have. So,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm similar in that way. I like routines and I think, routines can provide me some of the things that I'm looking for. But yeah, when it gets overstructured, it feels confining. So yeah,
right.
finding what works.
Yeah. I've always kind of jokingly said, like, a good day for me is a day that I can have my coffee in a real mug. which
Mm-hmm.
again, I know, you could say you could always do that, get up a half an hour earlier, but it's not about that. It's about kind of having this slow morning the way I want it, right?
Right.
And not having to be at a job at a certain amount of a certain time or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's like building those ideals. Like, what do you want your life to look like, and how do
Right.
you get there?
Yes. Yeah. And I think and like you said, that's just so personal, right?
Hmm.
It's each person has to self-determine that, and one person's is going to look so different from another. And that's where where if we focus on that, we really can stay in the gain so much more.
Right. I do have a list, some of the things that, um, that one person decided, like, how do I determine success? Which I just think
Hmm.
that's a good way of looking at it. Like, I can wake up every day and ask, what would I like to do today? And I'm like, okay, I
Hmm.
think I could adopt that one. My passive revenue exceeds my lifestyle needs. I can live anywhere in the world I choose. I'm working on
Hmm.
projects that excite me and allow me to do my best work. I can disappear for several months with no effect on my income. There are no whiny people in my life. I wear my watch for curiosity only. I have no time obligations or deadlines. I wear whatever I want all the time, and I can quit every time. These, I think, are really high level, like,
Hmm.
kind of goals, but I do think we can all get to some level of
Right. Right.
what we want our life to be.
Right. Exactly.
And again, even going back to cancer, I also like really encourage women to create kind of the life that they need to be as healthy as possible. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yes.
And that doesn't look the same for everyone. And again, that's
Right.
where I think, when you're sick too, there's so much voices telling you what to do, and you just have to really determine what
Right.
works for you,
Yes. Yeah.
not
Absolutely.
how to do it. So,
Yeah. Everybody's, plan is going to be different. So,
right.
yeah. And then I think just finding the practices that work for you, the little things that help you
Yeah.
achieve that individual plan.
Yeah. And also I think too, the one thing that I've realized is that I it doesn't have to be done quickly necessarily. Like, you
No,
know what I mean? What I'm
it's a long
realizing,
game.
it is a
Yeah.
long game. And I'm seeing now how my life as an occupational therapist and as a cancer patient and as working with the elderly and working with kids, all of this, I just feel like I'm watching it all come together. Like, all of these experiences, which at times I was like, what am I doing? Or what is this? It's
Right.
like, no, it does all work together, to hope to
Yes.
build what you want,
Right.
next.
Right.
And it talks about the Sydney rowing team, right?
Oh, I love that. Yes.
About um, will this make the boat go faster? And
Right.
I love that, and I can be that
Hmm.
intense at times, but it's also okay to go, nope, this isn't going to make the boat maybe go
Right.
that, you know what I mean? It might
Right.
slow it a little bit, but I'm okay with that kind of
Right.
thing,
Exactly. I'm not just doing that mindlessly, but I'm thinking about
Right,
that and making that choice. Yeah.
right. I think when I was like, sugar feeds cancer, that's like, will this make the boat go faster?
Right. Right.
Right? Like, super intense. And you can do it for a while. I can't do it. I couldn't do it forever. So,
Right. Yeah,
you know,
exactly. I think again, yeah, everything in balance, right? Because if you start getting so intense there, the ideal of never is going to create a situation where you're going into the gap because
right. Yeah. And almost,
versus,
yeah. Yeah. How much of
here's where I
that can
was
you
and here's where I
sustain?
am.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's what really at the end of the book, he talks a lot about just kind of building some routines where you're constantly, asking yourself, like, where have I made progress, or how have I made progress? What are
Right.
the daily wins, but also like looking at, 90 days, backwards, and always
Yes.
measuring backwards, which is
Always going backwards. Yeah, which is I think, yeah, it's hard to do sometimes. We're just so, I think, trained often to just be looking, okay, what's the next goal? What's the next thing? So,
Right.
yeah, looking backwards really, and, and,
Hmm.
and, and I think it can build excitement, right? When you look backward and you see where you've come,
Hmm.
you realize what you're capable of. So
Hmm.
it just feeds itself,
Well, and
So,
there's just a certain amount of energy to think, oh my gosh, we
hmm
are making progress, right?
hmm
You know, in my current my job as an OT, I work in a classroom that with a teacher who I really enjoy, and she has little kids who have a lot of
hmm
disabilities, and she a lot of times is like, whoa, and I was like, your kids could not sit in a circle to save their lives on the first day. They were,
hmm
you know, like it's just you have to look at that is significant progress, and
Yes.
you know, we just have
Yeah.
to call it that instead of.
We do. We have to remember and see it and celebrate it.
Mhm. So you're going to measure some wins or write them down? That's what
I am.
I'm hearing. Anything
Yes.
else?
Well, I have been back using a journal for gratitude practice. So in the morning, I try to write down those things that I'm grateful for, and I do think that's a good when I'm doing that well, I'm looking for those things I'm going to be grateful for. So I'm just paying
Yeah,
attention.
yeah,
So I do really love that. And this is a good reminder to stick with that. I got back with on that in, first of the year.
yeah. So,
Um,
a little bit of journaling at night and maybe a little bit in the morning. Is that what you're trying to?
that's my plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I was I've been looking for some visualization and meditation
mhm.
kind of things to fall asleep to because I use that so much when I was sick, and
Yeah.
I know the power of that also. And
hmm
it's just like, why am I not tapping into kind of some of these
hmm
things that I know are helpful?
My goals is meditate every day. I'm not great at it. I haven't found necessarily the right
I know
go-to
I
tools, and maybe that's the key to do different things. I don't know.
Well, I think for me, what I've found is that I hopefully maybe someday I'll get to meditation, but visualization is a good first step for
hmm
me because there's something to think about, like, or there's thoughts going, meditation is like kind of the lack of, like, right? It's clearing your mind,
Right.
which I haven't been successful at yet. So I feel
Good. Yeah.
like get the good thoughts going in first, and then,
hmm
we'll see
And
if
then
I
maybe
can,
go to, yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah.
maybe I can empty my brain later. I don't know. So. All right. Well, another book that I
Yeah.
thought maybe we could take on for February, if you're up for
Okay.
it.
I'm
It's
up for
called
it.
A Hundred Ways to Change Your Life by Liz Moody.
Okay.
And I listened to her on a podcast also. This is where all of our books are likely going to come from, is podcasts,
Right.
right? Um, but one of the things I liked about this was that she did say that there's nothing to spend money on. It's really just kind of making little tweaks, and it's about kind of just, upping your game a little bit with health, relationships, and different things. So I thought it might
Perfect.
be worth checking out. So,
I'm all in.
all right. Well, thank you for coming on and discussing the gap in the gain. I definitely think it has a lot of application to people who are dealing with health crises as well as, just normal folk.
Any of us, right?
Any of
Yep. But
us.
yeah,
Exactly.
good for
So,
everyone.
yeah. All right. Well, you're in for next month. So we'll see you in a month.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome.